I'm excited because last night I got a hold of the Mesifta on Menachos. And he has an extensive Hakdama, as I had hoped he would, which I think will add a great deal to our introduction to Kodshim. He points out that Masechta Zvachim deals with, primarily at least, animals, whereas Masechta Menachos deals with what's called Tzomeach, vegetation, and specifically Chitim or Siorim. So anything we say about Menachos is limited to wheat or barley, and sometimes we're going to add other products to the mincha which grow from the ground. For example, from olives we get shemen, and there is a spice that grows called levona, loosely translated as frankincense. Anyway, that's added to certain menachos. And sometimes we have also niskei yayin that accompany the menachos. And of course, yayin comes from grapes. So we have the product of olives and grapes and a spice called levona. All this is tzemach. He quotes here the Sefer Chinuch that gives sort of a philosophical background. He says that the symbolism or the spiritual impact of a mincha is to overcome the Yetzer Hara, because we see that when a person sins, he has to bring, under certain circumstances, a korban mincha, and this mincha is the burning of something that's valuable, like, for example, flour that's going to be burnt on the mizbeach. Alternatively, he says that the word mincha means a humble kind of a gift, meaning it's a less expensive gift than a korban of bali chaim with animals. And thirdly, he says that the word mincha means a gift, and very often a mincha comes b'nedava, and therefore it's a paradigmic gift to the mizbeach. Now he says, whereas zvachim, you distinguish between two categories, kodshim and kodshim kalim. That distinction does not apply to menachos. All of menachos, by definition, are kodshim. And we're going to talk about the circumstances of eating a korban mincha as kodshim. Now he says that there are, amongst the topics or the themes that are covered in this Masechta and are products of the Tzomeach, there's also a discussion about two categories of korbanos that are not technically menachos, even though they come from the tzemach, from that which grows, and that is chalos, nazir, chalos, toda, and rikike nazir. So we should just keep in mind, in terms of menachos, that we have two categories of korbanos that are not technically menachos, but they're included in this study of menachos. Now, we divide menachos into three subcategories. One is yachid. The yachid brings one of 9 different kinds of menachos. Now, that category called yachid subdivides into 2 categories. So if you have the flow chart, you've got menachos, you've got yachid, and then we'll have tzibur, and finally we'll have nisachim. Those are going to be your 3 major categories. But now let's focus our attention for a moment on yachid. So you've got menachos, you've got yachid, tzibur, and nisachim, and under yachid we branch off into 2 major subcategories of minchas hayachid. One is called minchas nidava, The other is called Minchas Chova. Again, these are all Korbanos Mincha of a Yachid. Now, when we talk about Neder and Nedava, then under Neder and Nedava, we have 5 subcategories of Minchas, Nidarim, or Nedavos. And these are, again, the words are not important because we're going to get into each one of them separately, but it's Minchas Machvas, Marcheshes, Mafetanu Shel Chalos, Mafetanu Shel Rikikim, all told 5 different subcategories of Minchas, Neder, Unidav. Then we have Minchas Chova, under which we have 4 categories. We have a Minchas Chote, a Minchas Knos, Chavitin, and Chinuch. So if you add 9, if you add 5 to 4, you get 9. Totally, on the Minchas Yochid, there are 9 subcategories that divide it into 2 categories. There's 5 and 4. 5 are Nedava and 4 are Chova. And all this is Yochid. Now, we get to the second major category of Menachos, and that is Tzibur. There are going to be no less than 3 Menachos that are brought by the Tzibur. Minchas HaOmer, Shtei HaLechem, and Lechem HaPonim. Okay. Then we get to the third category of Menachos, and that's called Minchas Nisachim. These are Nisachim that are not Korbanos in and of themselves, but rather are accompanying a Korban. And under this, we have Nisachim that are brought with a Korban Behemah. Okay, so in certain cases, we'll talk about an Ola, we'll talk about a Shlamim, and these Korbanos, whether they're Shel Tzibur or Shel Yochid, have to be accompanied by Nisachim. And Nisachim, one element or dimension of Nisachim is Mincha. And then there is Yayin, but that's also called a Mincha. All this are what we call Minchas Nisachim. Now, as a general rule, only 2 exceptions. All the menachos that we spoke about, ba'os matzah. So whenever you hear the word mincha, you automatically assume it's not leavened bread, it's matzah. With 2 exceptions, shtei lechem and lachmei toda. Now, amongst lachmei toda, not all lachmei toda, there are 40 lachmei toda, but amongst them, many of them are chametz and not matzah. And the shtei alechem for sure are chametz. Now, we could actually refine our statement and say that all menachos that are burnt on the mizbeach are matzah, because lachmei toda and shtei alechem are eaten either by the Kohanim or by the Bailim. They do not have the status of Haktorah al Gabi Mizbeach. So we're back to square one. Every single last mincha that's burnt on the Mizbeach is matzah and not chametz. Now, when we get to a minchas yachid, which is the first of the 3 categories of menachos, then we said that we subdivide them into 2 categories. The first of which is neder unedava. Okay. Now, in the case of neder unedava, and we said that there are 5 such categories, 5 menachos that are neder unedava. That's machvas, marcheches, mafetanu shel chalas, mafetanu shel rikikin. What's common to all these 5 is, number 1, Baos misoles chitim, so that you have two types of flour. You could have general regular flour that has certain admixture of pebbles and kernels, and then you could have refined flour, which is called soles. And in the case of a minchas yachid, which is a neder or nedava, it's got to be made of soles. Number two, the soles is soles chitim. We'll see that there is such a concept in mincha as siorim, as barley. But now we're talking about the general rule, and that is that with regard to the five categories of minchas, yachid, shel nedava, they are all brought with soles of chitin, of wheat. Now, the mincha is brought in a kli. What volume of soles does this kli retain? There's a minimum and a maximum. The minimum is called isaron. Okay, we can convert this into our volumes. And the maximum is 60 esronim. Now, if you bring a mincha that's more than 60 esronim, you have to add another kli. The kli has a maximum capacity of ad 60 isar. Now, it would seem that 60 isar, which we said is the maximum to bring in one single kli as far as the mincha is concerned, includes not only the soles of chita, but also includes the shemen and levona. We said that certain menachos are brought not only with soles chitin, but also with shemen and levona. So when we add together these three elements into one kli, it's got to have a maximum of 60 isara. Now let's go through the five subcategories of a minchas, neder, or nadav. The first is what's called minchas soles. Just 1 second. Oh, let's just point out what the difference is between a neder and an nadav. A neder is when a person says, Harei alai mincha. In other words, he doesn't point to the soles and say, well, this should be a mincha. He says, I will bring a korban mincha. That's called a neder. Later on, he's mafresh a mincha to fulfill his neder. But his neder, his commitment, is not just to be mafresh the mincha, but to be makriv the mincha. So up until the hakrava, he has not yet fulfilled his chiyuv of neder. And therefore, if after he took this neder, harei alai mincha, the mincha that he designated got lost or became tamei, he's got to replace it because he took upon himself a neder. Then we have a minchas nedava. In a minchas nedava, he says, harei zu soles lemincha. This soles is designated for mincha. In such a case, he doesn't have a general obligation to bring a mincha. He just has to bring this as a mincha. If this gets lost or stolen or tamei, he's off the hook. He doesn't have to. So we said that a minchas soles is going to be placed inside a kli together with shemen and levona. Uli acharak toras komtza necheles le kohanim. The Kohen is going to take off a kometz, a very small amount, out of this kli, and that's going to be burnt on the mizbeach. And the shirayim, meaning the rest of the karban mincha, will be eaten by the Kohen. Now, we're going to talk about a minchas machmas. Again, as we said earlier, the minimum amount of soles is got to be an isaron. One isaron is the minimum amount. And the soles is going to be mixed with shemen. And then, lasimo sa b'mayim poshrim, the ofeno sa b'machos. Again, the details here we don't know. Machas is a pan, and he's putting the pan inside the oven. And he calls it afia b'machas. Usually a machas is on an open fire, and then it's called tzli. In this case, it is a machas that is placed, inserted inside the oven. Now, after it comes out of the oven, Posicin osolipsisim, we crumble it into small crumbs. He doesn't tell you exactly how he does this, but nostin osa b'klisharis v'yakaf yotzkim ola shemen nostin ole levona v'yakaf komsin osa. So there's an entire process that's made up of 3 sections until you're finally ready for the Aktorah, or the Kmitza and the Aktorah. Number 1, you take soles together with shemen and you soak it in water. Number 2, what comes out of the machas is broken down into small crumbs. And afterwards, he says, oh, I see. Wait, my mistake. When I mentioned soles with shemen, I meant to say to make up the isar, the minimum value. But right now, he's taking the soles, he's soaking the soles in room temperature water. He now bakes it in a machvas, then breaks it up into small crumbs. After he bakes it, puts it into a klishares, then he adds the shemen. Not like what I said before, the shemen is there from the get-go. Then he places levona on top. Now we're ready for the kmitza. So all that is a description of what we call minchas machmas. Again, we haven't discussed why a person, or when does a person volunteer to bring a minchas machmas. Now we get to the next category of a minchas neder, and that is a minchas marcheshes. Now, it seems that the only difference between a minchas machvas and a minchas marcheshes is in the exact kli that he uses. Instead of using a pan, he uses a marcheshes. And he says, Nechluku tanoim behevdel beineim l'das Rav Yosef Glui l'marcheshes. What makes a marcheshes different than a machvas? Yesh michser. So these are both pans, and we take the refined flour that's been soaking in water, we put in the pan and we put the pan into the oven. But the only difference is that, according to Rabbi Yossi at least, that whereas a minchas machvas you use a pan, a minchas marcheshes you have a pan with a cover over it. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Chanina, he says something else. Then a marcheshes is a muka u'maser rachim machvas sofa u'maser Kodshim. And it seems that according to Rabbi Chanina, there's a difference between a marcheshes and a machvas in terms of what you end up afterwards. Is it something that's soft, or it's something that's basically solid, kosher? So in the case of marcheshes, it's got a deep receptacle, and therefore what you end up with is something soft. In the case of a machvas, by contrast, there it's maser Kodshim. It's not one of these deep utensils, and what you end up with is a solus that has been baked hard. Now, one interpretation has it that marcheshes is a deep kli, the ein hashemen sheba nisraf maher. The oil content doesn't burn quickly. Al kain hamincha nisheres raka, and therefore what comes out is still soft. Soft probably means that you can still pour it. A machvas sheshtucha, which is flat, al kain hashemen mispaser yogneha v'nisraf. Mitokach hamincha miskasher. So the contrast here between marcheshes and machvas is that in the case of marcheshes, because of its deep nature, the result is going to be something soft or possibly even pourable. But in the case of a machvas, because it's flat and it's not deep, then what you're going to end up with is a mincha kosher. It's going to be very solid. So that's one interpretation of the difference between marcheshes and machvas. So we need some sort of mnemonic device to remember this, that marcheshes is deep and therefore the product is soft and pourable, whereas machvas is flat, it's very low, and the product is kosher. You get something that's like almost like hard bread. However, he says, Yesha Pirish, according to another interpretation, marcheshes yesh lo dfanos. Not that it's deep, but rather that it has a surrounding wall, so to speak. That allows you to make a soft batter out of this mincha. Machvas, on the other hand, ain't law defanos, and therefore osimis habitseika kosher k'dei shelo yishpach hachutza. If you're going to pour refined flour together with water into a machvas, and there are no shulayim around it, then it's going to fall out. It's going to roll out because you don't have these defanos. So what are you going to do? You're going to put a dough that's hard into the machvas. it seems to me, if I understand this correctly, that both according to the first interpretation, that the marcheshes is deep, whereas the machvas is flat, or according to the second interpretation, that the machvas has fanos around it, whereas the marcheshes, I meant to say, has fanos around it, whereas the machvas is simply a flat pan. The bottom line is that the difference is in the product. And when you end up in a case of a marcheshes is a very soft kind of a batter. Masha Enkein, in the case of a machvas, you end up with something that's kosher, not raka, but kosher. And that's true according to both interpretations. Then we have a minchas mafe tanur, or maybe with that we'll pick up tomorrow. Okay, so Rabosa, we made a haskola here. I always forget to bring a pencil. I know I have one somewhere. All right, no, it's just if I don't make a note, chances are I won't remember tomorrow. Okay. So let me not hold you up. Let's open up the Masechta Yoma now. And